Why is this not? Just need to focus a little bit better, Pat. Just Well, thank you for your patience, everyone. We're just setting a few things up here. We're just having some problems with the light. We need to focus a little bit better, Pat. Okay, go ahead, Pat. Live stream isn't working perfectly, but we'll have to do with it. Go ahead, Pat.
Hi everybody, and welcome to our Mansion offices here in Dawson Street, just opposite the Mansion House here. This evening we want to talk about innovation, and we have two speakers. We have Damien Costello and Manoj Chawla. First of all, we have Damien. Damien is from a company called Decode Innovation, and his mission is to demystify innovation for businesses. I'll hand you over now to Damien, and just give us a second while we swap over our mics, and we're taking care of COVID regulations here, so just give us a minute.
So tell me when you're ready to share the screen. I'm on. First. Okay, so go ahead.
Thank you, Pat. When I was asked to speak here today, I was asked to address two questions. Who was I, and what did I understand about design thinking? The answer to the first question is I am Damien Costello. Sorry, we've got a problem with our. This is not advancing.
You have to press the phone button. I can't do it.
Okay, so I was born and brought up in the rural west of Ireland, and now that's where I returned home to raise my family. When I was growing up in the west of Ireland, I was obsessed with cars, and that was what brought me to design in the first place. And cars have, in the overall scheme of things, those cars have brought me on an interesting journey. I started off in the 1990s working as a designer. As a designer, I worked with enthusiastic professionals in lots of different companies designing objects. 10 years later, I was working in what was then called the fuzzy front end of innovation, working with managers, designing the systems that those objects fit into. Later, I found myself working in strategy, working with the ambitious leaders in organizations, designing the industry that they operated in, or more specifically, the place in those industries where my client companies wanted to fit. More recently, I've started operating in the field of disruption. Very topically, in the world that we live in today, we work with leaders who are feeling threatened, and we work with them to design how they're going to survive. And what I found across this whole spectrum is that whether it's design or strategy, that it's all the same thing. It's an activity where an individual or a group decides the future form and function of something new and communicates it effectively to those involved in making that a reality. So for me, it all started with design. And I don't know if you recognize the film or the era, but I arrived in Dublin in 1990. And this is a clip from the commitments, and you can see the railing there. It's behind that railing that the Industrial Design School was in NCAD. We lost it again. After spending a period working with different consultancies, I ended up in a company called Allies in Shankill in County Dublin. And we specialised in industrial and consumer electronics. When I started, we were working in 2D CAD, we moved on to 3D CAD, we dealt with the engineering, the cooling, the regulations, the materials, and the industrial design of a whole range of products. These products for a company called Eureka is probably where my last patents were developed. And I think now at this stage in my career, I think all of the patents that I was involved in are now probably expired. But the work we did there over a period, over multiple generations, led to the acquisition of Eureka by Adaptec in 2003. Around that time, we were working on, it was in the middle of the dot-com era, and we started thinking about innovation, thinking about working with venture capitalists on product due diligence and how the world, what products would work in the world. In 2002, just after I got married, myself and a colleague started up a company called Box Clever that's still in business today. We too worked in electronics, a lot of touchscreen type devices. We got the products made all over the world. This product was designed for manufacture in Germany. This is a product that I set up the production of in Taipei. We did a lot of work, or in Malaysia. We did a lot of work in Taiwan as well. The work we did with Eureka was also, or Europlex there, was also key to their acquisition by Siemens in the early noughties. I don't know, does anyone now use reversing cameras? But there was a time when they were not as ubiquitous as they are today. In 2003, we worked with Land Rover on their first reversing camera, which you can just about see here. I developed this particular system, and the most critical part of this for me, probably the scariest moment in my entire career, was sending the coordinates to put the holes in what they call the body in white, to put the holes in the metalwork of the Range Rover. Had I gotten that wrong, I'm not sure I would be here today. Anybody use GoPros? Anybody into adventure sports? Well, in 2003, we were working with Land Rover on the precursor to those type of products. This was a handheld camera that again brought a picture of on the dashboard of the same Range Rover. And one of the problems we had at the end of our design stage was that they wanted to move the docking station lower in the car. So I was given a weekend to find a place to put the docking station, to come up with the design, and to convince them that we could get it on the car in time for launch. In the end, we fitted it here. And the device that we created got onto the car and got launched. And that product is still in production today and still in use. I had found my way to the automotive industry, and I worked at the very end of the life of MG on a key fob where we had to the tooling and how it was going to be manufactured, because MG at the time couldn't afford to put the money into making proper expensive tooling. We ended up using design to solve innovation or problems. One of the issues with manufacturing cars at the time was a consolidation, and they wanted all of their sub-suppliers to come together in a number of tiers. And the issue with manufacturing products, in that scenario, the issue with manufacturing those products was the people who made the blades for the keys were in 19th century steelworks, and the people who made the body electronics were 21st century electronics company. And they needed to create a joint venture, to create an agreement together in order to be able to supply to MG. We, in the physical design of the product, got them to avoid that. We got them to not have to come together by coming up with this clip-on piece here, which could be clipped on with the blade, as you see on the left, or clipped on without a blade as a fob, as you see on the right. And that meant that all of the commercial agreements and all of the work that we needed to take two very different companies together didn't have to be done. The key and the blade found each other on the production line, snapped together, and that was a physical design solving a systems problem. Around that time, I was on a flight to New York, and I came across a book called Funky Business in the airport bookshop. And what attracted me to it was the tagline was "Talent makes capital dance," and that has been an inspiration to me ever since. We went on at that point to create a business called Think Fast, which started to look at real innovation. And at the time, I thought I was going to be the next Tom Peters, for those who remember who Tom Peters was. With this, we ended up working with PERA. PERA is the innovation network in the UK that was founded by Winston Churchill after World War II to make sure that Britain didn't fall behind. It was that foray into innovation that eventually brought me full-time into the innovation space. And I started with a company called Cataway in 2006. I started in Cataway because they had recently made an arrangement with Darrell Mann. And Darrell Mann was someone I was really interested in working with. He wrote several books on innovation, and he was a practitioner of a process called TRIZ, which was something that fascinated me at the time. And TRIZ is an entire other conversation. To give you an idea of the basics, they have a whole list of trends and how things evolve, one of which is the trend of dynamization, which says that things go from solid to a jointed, to a flexible, to a fluid, to a field-based system. Sounds abstract, but in practical terms, if you think about distance measurement, you have a ruler, you have a folding ruler, you have a tape measure, and then you have a field solution. You've got a laser measurement. Similarly, in vision correction, you had a monocle, you had spectacles, you had flexible frames, you had contact lenses, which were practically entirely fluid-based, and then you had laser surgery. So these were things that repeated over and over in person protection. You had shield, you had suit of armor, you had Kevlar, and around this time we were looking to a fluid-based system. There wasn't any out there, and along came the sort of non-Newtonian armors, the sort of armors that are gel until somebody falls, and they get hard when somebody falls. They're used in extreme sports now. We're still waiting for the science fiction version, the ultimate expression of this particular trend. I worked with lots of very large names in this space. We worked with a lot of companies on their business strategy. I worked on process innovation, technology roadmaps. Did a lot of work on designing and installing innovation systems in organizations and large-scale problem solving. And to give you an idea of the type of problems that we solved, one project working with the European Director of HR for a large organization, we identified that their silo culture was one of their big weaknesses. And the organization had no tools to deal with a silo of experts. They were a company that relied on its expertise. So messing with the experts was something that really they didn't want to even think about. But it was a big problem for them. And we addressed that by defining the silo culture as a form of professional exclusivity. And that exclusivity, we reframed, which is one of the key steps in the innovation process. We reframed that problem to say that their silo culture was a form of prejudice. And once we mentioned the word prejudice to a HR organization, they knew exactly that something had to be done about it, but more importantly, they knew that they had the tools to deal with prejudice. So by reframing the problem in a way that the client and the people I was dealing with in the client's organization could deal with, the problem started to be less, could be addressed systematically.
Again.
So about 6 years ago, as Pat mentioned, I felt that innovation consultants were actually making things more complicated rather than simpler, making it harder for organizations to leverage the power of innovation. So I started to decode, to demystify innovation. And again, we worked with lots of large organizations on strategy, service strategies, and process innovation. A huge amount of the work we did over a period was on digital transformation and technology roadmaps, and a lot of it was involved in business development, finding new places for organizations to operate in. In the last couple of years, we've pulled together that whole program into a remote innovation training program that was being piloted just before the lockdown hit. And it's based on a 6-step process. Over the years, we found that sharing and defending those innovations over time was where the real hard work was. But in the training, we train people in the first 4 steps, how to go from zero information to the best solution possible in a given situation. Most recently, we've partnered with a company in Cork called Making Shit Happen to develop a disruption management program that's based on an understanding of how disruption works. It's a process to take people from normal to a successful position in the new normal. And there's 2 services at the top of it. It's disruption mitigation and transform to disrupt, based on the fact that large organizations are big and slow, small organizations are small and fast, but they both want to transform into being big and fast. They both want to be competitive and agile and successful in the new world. And finally, in my spare time, since the beginning of lockdown, I've been involved with Pivot Projects. Pivot Projects is a group of about 200 thought leaders from all over the world who are working to train an AI system to provide proper data and usable information for policymakers in their attempts to address the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So my entire career has spun right around to my belief that design can indeed save the world. And through my career and the journey that I've been on, everything has been about design. And the conclusion that I drew out of all of that is that the world works either by design or by accident. And nobody wants it to work by accident. That's me. So I was asked to talk about what design thinking meant, or the significance of design thinking for me. And it goes back to part of the story that I left out a little bit earlier. So, are we sharing?
Yes.
Okay. So,
1 minute actually. It's, need to tell it to share again. That one.
So the story of design thinking, or at least its significance in particularly corporate America, in the business world in general, goes back to a television slot in 1999. And the California design company IDEO did a 60-minute slot, which can be found on YouTube. It's a fascinating watch where they spent a week, the camera spent a week following them designing a shopping trolley. And before that, there was no real consciousness of design in the business world. So Tim Brown was the CEO of IBM for a number of years, and he's written extensively on it. His book, Change by Design, is probably one of the seminal books on the topic. He said that design thinking is a human-centered approach to innovation that draws from the designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for business success. So in the period between in 2006, between ending as a designer and becoming a full-time innovator, I spent a week with some colleagues in California, in Palo Alto. People who had worked with IDEO and become very close and still friends with people who were involved in IDEO from the start. And my colleague was given a key fob at the beginning of the week, and we wandered in and out of IDEO all week long, including doing and attending improv classes, which in 2006 was unheard of this part of the world. At the same time, we visited Tesla at a very early stage in their gestation, because some of the people at the early stages of Tesla had come from IDEO. This is in 2006, before Elon Musk had become CEO. At the time, they only had 1.5 Teslas and 1 Lotus in the garage. And I have to admit that at the time, I didn't see them changing the world as they have. We also spent time in the D School in Stanford, which was started by IDEO and the Hasselblatter School. And I found it to be underwhelming. My colleagues were blown away by it. And the reason I found it underwhelming is it was exactly like what we were doing in Dublin in design in the 1990s, except if you remember, Dublin in the 1990s was in black and white. And the story they tell is that IDEO tell about design thinking is it comes at the intersection between desirability, viability, and feasibility. The first time I saw it was in this diagram where they talked about technology, business, and human values. And it resonated with me for a lot of reasons. But what I want to talk to you about today is, why is all that important? What does that all mean? I mentioned previously that I work with Making Shit Happen. They work with an American company called Herman. Herman has a model of the human brain that they use for team building. And I think it's useful to understand how design thinking fits into the world. Their model says that the brain is divided into a left and right, and there's a lot written about the left brain, right brain. But they also say that it's got an upper and a lower level. There's a cerebral thinking level and there's a limbic action level. And that breaks down into 4 personality types, 4 thinking preferences that people tend to have. The blue preference, the A preference, is an analytical style of thinking. The green preference, B, is a practical style of thinking. The C, red preference, is a relational style of preference. And the D, yellow, is an experimental style. And what you find is that most large organizations are run by blue-green people. And they're scientists or they're accountants, and those people don't think particularly creatively. Some of them do, and because of their role, they act blue-green. And it is because of this divide that design thinking is so critical. People who are blue use innovation as, they innovate using analysis. Green people use process to innovate. Red people use collaboration to innovate and creative intelligence. Yellow people use imagination. And this breaks down into two distinct camps. Analysis, where you break things down into its parts, and synthesis, where you pull new things together. And one of the fundamental pillars of design thinking is the synthesis piece, where you create new stuff. And the way you create new stuff is you diverge, you come up with lots of ideas, lots of choices, in order, without any judgment, in order to have resources that you then funnel down into the best choice for the information you have at the time. And as I spoke before about the type of system that we use, it is a triple diamond approach. It's a diverge, converge approach. Another aspect of the design thinking that's critical is that it is fundamentally human-centered. And the reason that this is important is that design thinking model, the idea of customer desirability, technical feasibility, and commercial viability, that gives the customer desirability parity of esteem. It puts it up on the same level as the other concerns of leadership. And this is important because tech companies typically didn't think a lot about customers, and accountants don't think much about customers or technical feasibility, and engineers think about technical feasibility but don't think about the other elements. So design thinking forces organizations to think about these things in a more balanced way. Another key aspect of the dynamic is that design thinking is very different to logical thinking, but it's highly complementary. It's really important that a balance is struck. And that's why you have all of these design thinking processes to help get the design thinking of the right brain working for people on the left. There's a lot of different stories about the processes. IDEO talk about ideation, inspiration, and implementation and how they operate together. My favorite, I think probably the best book in the space is by Gene Littke and Tim Ogilvie. And they talk about what is, what if, what wows, and what works. And D-School and IDEO use empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. It's all the same. It's all ways of packaging the creative design process in ways that ordinary business people can use and get value out of. And the last of the components that IDEO described is what it feels like to go on a design thinking journey, what it feels like to get involved in a project. And you start off with hope. You start off with these aspirations, what you want to achieve. And then you dig deep to find that insight, that knowledge that you will bring back and change the world with. And as you build up and you move through, you build more and more confidence that you have the right solution. And it's in that deep dive, that dig down for those insights, that some of the frustrations and that some of the people who are not fully committed to it start to lose ground. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like or what that feels like, I'll end on this note on focus groups and how not to successfully understand what people need in a design.
Thank you for your time and welcome to our focus group. Today we're going to show you an idea and ask for your opinion. This is called fire. Now, according to its developers, fire can be used for cooking, as a heat source, and to scare away those unwanted wild animals. Your thoughts?
My first impression is it looks dangerous. Yeah. And if it gets hot, then it could burn me. Yeah. How do you turn it off?
Well, you'll pour cold water on it.
I don't like the red colour. Huh? I mean, I think a blood, it reminds me of death. Yes. Does it come in green?
No green.
If there was a cold fire. It didn't burn.
Maybe I would buy me one of those.
It's amazing that they pay people to come up with such fire.
So that's my warning about design thinking and not sticking with it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Damien. Very interesting, great story, I must say. Okay, we're now going to hand you over to Manoj. Manoj is a business consultant with a difference. He creates value by designing and building businesses. So I'll hand you over now. Just give us a second to hand over the mic.
I'm just going to set the share screen. So, hope everyone can hear me all right. Just bear with me while I put on the microphone. Welcome to the group. Really delighted that you joined us. Thank you very much, Damien. That was a super presentation. I'm sure everyone will think about it. You had lots of questions afterwards. So let me take you back to the next stage. Damien expanded on the concept of TRIZ. Now I'm going to take you beyond TRIZ and beyond design thinking. Because TRIZ was very functional, would you agree, Damien, on the mechanical side and fantastic on patterns.
Yeah.
And it tells you the pipeline of evolution. And it's very profound. But what if you could take it 10 times further? And that's what Damien's been working on, that's what I've been working on, so let me share that with you. Don't know why this is not working. Thank you very much, Pat. So a little bit about me. Both of us have started with our backstory. Next clip, please, Pat. So I've always had a passion for innovation. When I was young and this high, my grandfather would take me along to all the ministers and say, tell them about your idea. I'd say, solar power is the future. And I was encouraged, and I used to invent and try lots of things. And then my father, we had a family business here on Grafton Street, just down the road. And he taught me a lot about the different trends and fads and about selling. So really what I've done is not only taken from that family background and that passion. In college, I used to get lots of speakers along. I focused on innovation, and it's something I worked on now for over 30 years. But the really profound stuff for me was that I could take it into inventing new businesses and new ideas, which I did in B2. And so for my sins, I invented low-cost internet. So if you're using internet and you start using 5G, that core idea, and then subsequently the work that I got involved with business transformation and innovation and other startups really got me to develop the methodologies that I'm sharing with you. But this was the award, and as you know, the internet is now $1 billion business for telcos. Let's see if this works. Yeah. So one of the things you tend to find is the people who see the pattern. Earlier on, Damien talked about the creatives and the different people. So the creatives, when they are developing and they're synthesizing, they are making connections that other people don't get. And I find myself for 6 years in the wilderness trying to tell people about this. I'll take it through. So the real challenge is you may be the first to see it. The question is, how do you get others to see it? And then when everybody sees it, it's so bloody obvious, you wonder what was so smart about it in the first place. So the other thing you tend to find is that the buying process takes a lot longer. And if you can understand where the consumer is going, you can carry more insight into it. And so one of my biggest mistakes over the last 10, 20 years was I was 10 years too early. Now I tend to keep the ideas distilling and I wait to see market readiness. So Zoom is a great example of market readiness. Now, those of us who've been working in large corporates have been working remotely and using this technology, but now it's ubiquitous, and people are using it to run house parties and network and so on. So usually what tends to happen is early adopters and special case people develop their own solution, but then it becomes ubiquitous and everybody says, what's the big deal? So this is why I talk about the future is already here, but it's just unevenly distributed, which is a very famous saying from one of my favorite science fiction people, William Gibson. So just so that you understand that I'm not bragging, I thought I'd share what other people say about me first.
Hi, I'm Rob Longstaff. I'm a recruiter and international headhunter. I've known Manoj for over 25 years, and during that time I've never met anyone that understands the technology space the way that he does. He understands things to such a degree, he understands the depth of knowledge that few other people even imagine. He's really got his finger on the pulse, often before the trends really come to light. I can't recommend Manoj strongly enough with his knowledge and the depth of that knowledge.
And
thanks very much.
Thank you. So I was talking with Howard yesterday, that very kindly said that he would do a little intro for me. Now, I met Howard when I was building data warehousing had just come in. The internet had just come in. I converged all of them and built one to implement program management, and that's how I got to know Howard. Another example of me working with somebody is, I'll just share this with you. Just press play, please.
Now, our next guest has taken the humble coconut and made it into a global business. The firm now exports almost half of its products to 28 countries, but has kept manufacturing here in the UK. And it was founded by Jacob Thundil, who grew up in the Indian state of Kerala, which means the land of coconuts.
See, I never knew that. Well, Jacob's with us this morning. He's the founder of Cocofina. Nice to see you, Jacob. Welcome. So first of all, you're from Kerala, and just describe, you were telling me about that view you get when you land at the airport in Kerala, and all you can see for miles around is coconut trees.
Thanks for having me. It's called, poets describe it as green silk, because when you're landing, you see the tops of the coconut trees, and it's the most amazing, soothing thing to see, especially when you're a Keralite. And that's what I look forward to when I travel home.
Before we talk about this, we've got to talk about the fact that you were thrust into running a business at the age of 17 because your father died, sadly, and you described to me as being the last man standing, and you just basically had to take on board this company at 17 years old.
I was 17, my dad passed away, and it was pretty sudden. I took over the business, and at times I thought I looked very serious, but at the age of 17...
And just explain what that business was, sorry.
So my dad was into cashew nut byproducts, and I took over the business and ran it while doing my engineering degree. So food, I think, is also science when you're producing it to scale, and the engineering has helped me in a big way to understand pH values of coconut water, how do you get purity, how do you conserve the quality of the water, and to add to it, Kerala has helped me a lot, because coconut's like wine. It's got, it's affected by taste, terrain, climate, and also the species of the nut. So when you're looking at all those factors, it helps me because I grew up with it.
So you ran that company for 4 years while you were trying to do a degree. You then passed it on to your mum.
Yes.
And then you started working for other companies for a bit before you started this one.
So I came to the UK to do an MBA initially for only a year, and I thought I'm going to go back to my lovely coconut state. But what happened is I landed a graduate placement with BT, and then ended up staying every year for another year because every time I wanted to leave, they offered me a pay rise. And I had a lovely boss as well, so I didn't want to leave. And then I worked for Lloyd's, HBOS, HSBC, Accenture, and then finally I just had to leave because the coconuts were beckoning me. I was sitting on a beach in Brazil, and I was given a coconut to sip. And this was my calling. So I just went, the best thing in the world for me, I'm going to quit and start selling coconut water in the UK, and that's what I did.
And many people will remember a craze maybe a year, 18 months ago. Everywhere you went was coconut water. Now, coconut water is just a part of your business. But talk me through that huge boom and that massive rise in interest, and then how you managed to cope with it tailing off slightly.
The way I describe that is when you go to the gym in January and you see all these members and you think, I've been exercising, all year, and now I've got these annoying people who are creating all this noise. So we've been doing this for 12 years, and suddenly we had 30 odd new entrants come in, and many of them were just putting a label on coconut products because they just thought, let's cash in on a trend. But I have to say, of late, there's been no new market introductions. And if there was, because recently I went to an exhibition called Natural and Organic Products in London, there was a new entrant, and I actually felt sorry for him because there's no space for new listings. The old players have a little bit of space because we have been doing that for a while.
And it's not just about, so it's not just coconut water now. I mean, you've got some of the stuff here, coconut oil, there's coconut a day bars, there's coconut sugar. I mean, there's all sorts of things. And that, I mean, does that spread the risk?
We do 32 products, and what we have is, like most established businesses, we have cash cows like coconut water, coconut oil, grated coconut, coconut milk. They earn us money, we pay our rent with that. But then we have to innovate. So if you look at what you see on the table there, there's two products. One's a coconut oil sachet on the go. So when people travel, they use it for beauty purposes. This idea came out because my sister used to travel with coconut oil, and it used to get in the luggage. So I thought, there's a market there because people use it for their hair. And
that's why it's in a sachet.
Yes, so it's a single-use sachet. And then if you look at the amino there that you can see, it's a soy sauce alternative. So people who have soy allergies or people who don't want to consume soy.
So there is an example about making it smaller, making it bigger. So just like Chris has a sequence and evolution from flexible, it also has a pattern for making things smaller. And that was an example of taking the smaller and the packaging and the needs. Pat, you want to go to the next one?
It's a soy sauce alternative. So people who have soy allergies or people who don't want to consume soy.
So there is an example about making it smaller and making it bigger. So just like Chris has a sequence and evolution from flexible, it also has a pattern for making things smaller. And that was an example of taking the smaller and packaging the needs.
And he helped me to understand the patterns of innovation. And once you see these patterns, it's very difficult to unsee them. So unless you're prepared for your eyes to be opened, I warn you not to come to this course. I have applied for my first patent.
All right, just let me go back. No, you click on the thing, Pat.
Yeah.
I'm the founder of Cocofina, an organic food and drinks company. Prior to setting up this company, I worked for Manoj in BT, where he was a general manager. And he helped me to understand the patterns of innovation. And once you see these patterns, it's very difficult to unsee them. So unless you're prepared for your eyes to be opened, I warn you not to come to this course. I have applied for my first patent 6 months ago. I have applied this patterns of innovation for many of my new product developments. So I'm sure that you will enjoy this new course.
So as I said, doesn't matter whether you're a startup or a billion-dollar company. Once you see the patterns in the marketplace, in the products, that a half factor will hit it, and it doesn't have to be about serendipity. So one of the things that I'd like to do is to ask you, in front of you, I'm going to take a minute. What I'd like you to do is have a look at the chart in front of you, okay? And what I'd like you to do is to find the numbers in sequence. So go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, till you cover them all. I'll give you 1 minute, and then just take a note of how many items you cover. If you want to put it up in the text, in the chat, then Pat can have a look at it and give your view. So starting now, if you just start and then just put down till what number you found in sequence. Are they putting it in the chat, Pat? Can you see the chat window on the other thing? Can you see the chat on my screen there? Originally, we had planned to do this event in person because we wanted to give this sheet to everybody and take them through it. Damien, how many did you manage to get to find?
13.
13. All right. Was it difficult?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what if I said that instead of all that clutter, we were to make it easy? If you tried it this sequence, just click once and then again. No, yeah, click once and again and again. Now, if you were to break this into 4 quadrants and go through it in the sequence of going top quadrant 1, then 2, then next to 3, then 4, then 5, you would find that you could cover a much faster number. Have a go now, Damien. Are people putting their numbers in the chat, Pat? So what you will notice is if you do it in that sequence, you'll get through it much faster because you've cut the cognitive load, and the brain is fundamentally a pattern recognition machine. And once you know how, it's obvious. Most 16 somebody else. Right. Okay. Thank you. So if we just go on to the next slide, it's a distance issue. Okay. So, sorry. Let me just go back. So if you have a look here, innovation is not only about technological or product or mechanical innovation or software. We always tend to associate it with technology, but actually innovation can happen in marketing, in product, in financial. Like if you look at it, the first innovation in cars that tripped it around and now is bigger is financial innovation, where people started to either rent or borrow, and it took away the pain. And in the 1990s, I went around and I told BT that Microsoft would shift its revenue, and you remember this, I took you through those slides, Damien, and they would move to a subscription model. And now you see subscription everywhere. In fact, there's now a trend against subscription because when you have high degree of uncertainty, nobody wants commitment. Okay, so bearing in mind, context is very important. You can have process innovation, you can have management innovation, you can have structural innovation and regulatory information. So all businesses work under a license. If you look at what has happened to TikTok, TikTok was banned in India, and the byproduct of that has been that the Indian competitor that came first to market very quickly was growing at 500,000 users an hour. And in 2 weeks, they had 100 million users. Why? Because if you lose your mandate, and organizations, you know, when I worked in BT, I would tell people, what is our biggest competitor and what if we lost? And everybody would say our network or our customers. And I said, no, the fundamental thing is every company has a license to operate. If you're a pub, or you're a telco, or you're a pharmaceutical, and you use the license for your product or your service, you're dead in the ground. So when regulation comes about, it can change the field, right? So we've covered, there's a whole bunch of patents, and I've taken it way beyond what Triz did to cover software, internets, interoperability, and I've combined it with market patents. So if you come or you want me to run your company, I cover that. But the evolution doesn't just happen on the product changes the company changes the market changes the industry and the environment, and it's sequential in that. So innovation is never static. It's an ongoing thing. People will imitate and copy, and it becomes an industry. So what you typically start, and you have to look at is, are my customers' priorities changing? COVID, while we are habituating, it is changing some fundamental habits and behavior. Similarly, you have changing technology, which changes capability. You have competition affects you, because without competition, there's no real need to change. And then, of course, you have the entrepreneurial drive. If you don't have the hunger, it's not going to happen. And then we talked about regulation. So these can be some of the factors, and you cover it in an MBA class and things like this. So you can either look towards doing innovation in a small, cheaper, better, faster way, which we typically cover in the maturity model. And a lot of innovation is really about simpler things to make it better. So i.e., improving or doing it the right way. And large companies are very good at that. So if you can break it down into a process and you get your sequences right, then you can do the obvious things by improving your competency, improving the process to improve quality, repeatability, consistency, efficiency, and making it faster and cheaper and lower risk. Okay? But you can also change it in a much more fundamental way, which I'll come to in a moment. So the hows are really what I call about the 3 T's, the tools, techniques, and training. And so if you go to McDonald's, they've systemized the process for making a Big Mac. They've made it really easy, and they've trained their people very quickly to make it as quickly as possible. So if you break a task down, and the same applies even in sports, because if you simplify it, you can literally do it by habit. So your maturity model typically goes from ad hoc to systemization. And startups start at that chaotic end. And very often, then it's that journey of scalability, repeatability, defined, capable, and efficient. But then it makes it very difficult to change. If you're world class and somebody throws the rule book because the technology changes. So if you're Dell and the internet comes, you can go direct, whereas beforehand you had to go and sell it through stores. So if you think about it, this is where companies start and make their journey up. And there it's really about product and market fit. Would you agree, Damien?
Absolutely.
Right? Whereas for the established company, it's all about relative to the competition once it's established. So if we were to talk about Triz, you can see those patterns applying to something as simple as shaving, right? So really it's about, the requirements are dead simple at a functional level, right? And that's driven by fashion. Like today we're seeing more and more people getting beards, but when it was fashionable and the media pushed it, the Cary Grant look or whatever, it was simple. How can I look, well, clean shaven, do it safely, do it quickly, do it at the least cost? And it went through this evolution. So it went from the straight blade, which required constant sharpening, and it was unsafe to use, difficult to use. So you usually went to a barber to do it. And then the safety razor, which was a modular design. So it said, rather than try to sharpen the blade, let's just make it easy to remove the bit that wore away. So you went for this modularity approach. And I'm sure a lot of you remember where the blade becomes separated from the handle. Okay? So if I go back to that for a moment, you'll see that what it does is it replaces the blade, aims to avoid uneven wear, reduce the cost. And so when you're unclear about requirements, whether you're making a PC or a phone, you make it modular. And what that allows when you make something easier is it allows it to go self-service. And then it's usually about making it better. So we talk about transition and poly systems, which is a well-established TRIZ process. Okay? So it goes 1 blade, 2 blade, 3 blade. And similarly, you can look at the evolution about making it single head, making it disposable, putting an information strip on it. You know, there's a lot of joke about Bluetooth toothbrushes, you know, and all that warning stuff. And again, putting power and electricity to it. So those patterns weren't in TRIZ, but we've taken those patterns a lot further. So you've got your lubricating strip, and then you've got your electric one, and you've got your grip strip, and now it's gone up. Is it 5 or 6 blades, Damien? The 6, right? So you can see 5 and 1, right? So and then you start to see that you also tend towards let's put an electric motor to it, okay? And not only that, the subsystem. So instead of you needing a brush, you idealize and say, let's get rid of the brush and the soap and make it smaller by making it those King of Shaves oil. I don't know if you've seen or remember that, Damien. Okay, so and then the usability creates niche products for women's shavers, and I'm sure you come across the Venus shaver, and similarly the disposable and products coming online. So you are traveling, and then you have a complete solution. And then, of course, if you go bigger, once it becomes commoditized, as much as Gillette and all would like to do it, a portion of the market, and so do you want to press the play just to get the video going?
Hi, I'm Mike, founder of DollarShaveClub.com. What is DollarShaveClub.com? Well, for $1 a month, we send high-quality razors right to your door.
So I'm sure you've seen it. It's a very funny ad. But really what it did was, and he started it in 2011, and in 2016, Unilever bought it for $1 billion in cash. So if we just, can you click for me, Patrick?
Lubricated.
Click on the video just below.
Strip and a pivot head.
Right? So if you look at it, to create the thing, the customer has to be willing, the online process makes it easy to sell, the logistics are easier, right? Because it's easy to put it in a little envelope and send it, the customer is ready, and the pricing fits the model. So do you want to go on the next one? So the business challenge is really about also understanding how the market is evolving. And we can show you how to get that, as we talked about. So let's take another product, and I'd like you to try to apply that model by taking an evolutionary approach. One of the things that we did, and Damien went through it with his own thing, is everything has an evolutionary approach. So take something as simple as a toast. Now, the word toast gets its word from people used to serve it with wine, and the expression toast came from that. And then we moved on to the concept of, so in the Middle Ages, they used to use fire and they used to have toast. Now I'm going to take you through that evolutionary pattern that I've outlined there. So initially, the product that is developed is substandard, and it is the nature because the market and the ecosystem is not ready. So you have two issues. Let me digress for a moment and take you through Google. When Google were building the search engine, they needed to build their capability, and they ended up with 2 million PCs to do all the searches for you. So they became very good at running that infrastructure, and that allowed the birth of all the cloud services, right? Because when you develop one capability, you can extend it into another. But if the service is available offline, you can go to someone else. So if it doesn't exist, you have to solve all the problems yourself. If it exists, you can outsource the manufacturing. So it depends. So when Alan McMaster came up with it, it was a byproduct. So he was actually working on the tube, and I don't know if you've seen any toasters like this. So they were electrifying for the London Underground, and he noticed the heating effect. And he thought, why don't I make a toaster? And the trouble was the product he developed was fundamentally unsafe. You also didn't have standardized electricity plugs, standardized electricity, and the biggest problem was the filaments kept on breaking apart from fire. Okay, so that was the first, but so the rich people usually ended up buying it because it's seen also as a status. But the big evolution happened when Albert Reloy Marsh invented this particular thing. He invented a thing with nickel and chromium alloy, right? And that ended up, so that was his background. So he ended up a metallic alloy with a high resistance wire, which could be durable and make a safe element. And chroma allowed the toaster to get made. But you still had to have an evolution. So even though that was patented in 1906, now General Electric really came out of Edison, and they put in power everything. So put in electric motor, anything that could put electricity, and that's a pattern you will see. So think about if any of you have a standing table, you'll see it stands up electrically. Let's take a table. So how do I make it variable, make it flexible? So there's two patterns coming in there. The convergence of electricity in the motor, as well as the need to make it flexible. Okay, so similarly, if you look at General Electric, they said, okay, let's make the toaster. So they had a chap called Shaler, and he made this toaster, but it still had a problem. It was still a manual product. You still had to flip the toast by hand. But usually what people did was they put it on the tabletop and they cooked the toast at their breakfast table. And it got rid, for the middle classes and the elite, of needing a servant to be making the toast on the pan. So if you look at it, the Waters Genter Toastmaster was the next big evolution. Okay, so in price terms, if you look at it, it would today, in today's money, cost $180. Okay, so the first consumer pop-up toaster. Okay, so this model really started to change things around. And again, this follows a model of automation. So today, when we think about home automation and Nest and all of that, it's no more different from the electric toaster where you didn't need to stand and take it out and it would pop it out itself. And it toasted it on both sides at the same time. So you can see how these patterns are obvious, except it takes 20 years to come out with it. Okay? So by putting a cover, it also made it safer. And then, of course, you had the definitive toaster, which really is, go ahead and play that, Pat. Thank you.
This is a 1939 Toastmaster 1B9 toaster. It's a beauty to behold, a streamlined masterpiece in Art Deco art form complete with a fin on the front. Today's manufacturing couldn't touch this thing if they tried. It's the perfect toast-making machine, a product of over 30 years of development and research into getting...
So...
And I mean, it's just a toaster, right? Well, yes and no.
You need to click, there's more text to that. So this kind of formed the archetypal. So early in a product, you get a lot of innovation. And then what you find is a generic form factor takes over, whether it's in the candy bar telephone model or whatever. Go ahead. Don't click on, no, click on the right hand.
You see, this is literally the only toaster I've seen that makes perfect golden toast every...
So that was the 1939, and it was the first one to exploit the curvature of chrome. Okay, and by making it look nice, it makes it easier for people to take it into their product. So aesthetics, niceness, and fashion have an important part in the sensibilities of a customer. Would you not agree, Damien? Right? And that's why we think about design, right? So I mean, think about it. In 1947, it sold 7 million units, or 19. So that's a big number. So the automatic toaster lends itself to a whole bunch of other stuff, okay? Now, the other thing with the automatic slicing machine, because what was missing was standardizing the bread. So the minute the subsystem evolves with the slicing machine, okay? Now, the interesting thing was that none of the bakers wanted to except Frank Bench. He was in financial problem. He took a punt in it. And so he was willing, whereas the rest of the people said, don't worry about it. Hence the expression, selling like sliced bread. Because the minute he got it, his sales went up 20-fold, and the rest is history. But that standardized actually helped the toast industry, because a standardized toast made it easier to make toast. So if you look at it, it's moved from an expensive luxury to an essential kitchen tool. And every year there's like 17 to 20 million sold. So, and now the form factors and the different use cases start to. So you can have a thicker, bigger, smaller, all these patterns, make 4, make 2, make it thick, make it small, make it toast bread, so there's your toaster. And then of course you've got things particularly for hotels and all, where you have these automated toasting machines. So hopefully, if you want more details, you can join our group by scanning that code there. You can connect with me through those websites, or you can join the chat group there, or give me a call if you've got some questions, if you need any help with your ideas. Damien and myself are ready to take your questions now, if you have any questions. Pat, can you moderate if you don't mind? Just check up on the chat, and Damien, if you want to come and join me here, obviously keeping a safe distance. You stand there, and hopefully that kind of fits the. Any questions?
Yeah. Has innovation changed over the years, or is this something new, or is it?
Innovation itself as a discipline, I think as part of the story we told earlier, design wasn't really considered a serious element of business really until around the turn of the millennium. The idea of a formalized process is something that's been around since the middle of the 20th century. But the way the world is now, and the way things are changing and moving as fast as they are, you need a systematic process to be able to do this in order to be able to keep up.
Yes, exactly. So what we're doing is seeing it systemizing. The biggest danger we have is when corporates take it over, they follow it too literally. And that takes away the creativity and the aha moment. So you also need to have that insight, and you need to have the patterns. So just following design thinking as a process, or any of them, is kind of like painting by numbers and calling it art.
Yeah, I think that there's a symbiotic relationship. I think large organizations bring scale, bring efficiency, and over a period of time, industries mature, and that's a critical part of the life cycle. And then on the other hand, every now and then, a shakeup is required. And in that shakeup is the opportunity for disruption. In that shakeup is where the new players, the startups, emerge, turn things on its head, and then they start a new life cycle until their innovations become the gold standard.
Exactly. And the biggest danger also is with governments, there's this tendency to one shoe fits all. And they overregulate early. So whether you go back to the day when the car was invented, and they started to put the red lantern law where you had to walk in front. So you have to be careful not to bureaucratize innovation. And you need to understand that it is a process of experimentation.
Yes, and I think the key to part of this whole story and how systematized innovation can be is that with the right structures in place, large organizations can innovate. The critical piece of the mindset shift that's required in order to do that is that the mindset shift that's required is that large organizations make strategies and plans, and they expect the outcome to be known before they make their investment. And if you're trying to do something that hasn't been done before, you need to make the investment in a process, in a system, knowing that a systematic process will give you a result. But if you knew the result of an innovation process before you started, by definition, that's not innovation.
Exactly.
Okay.
In Ireland, I was very glad to hear of your stories of your innovation and so forth. Does the Irish education system encourage innovation?
I'm not sure that any education system encourages innovation. I think the idea of systems that work towards exams and teach design, learning by rote and regurgitating somebody else's wisdom is an analytical approach, breaking things down into its pieces. We do need to get better at a more synthetic learning, a learning where we give children the building blocks and allow them to create the new insights. And that's how they operate in play. And they're naturally wired like that. And the education system sort of takes that out of them. And if it just made a little bit more space for children to be children, I think there'd be a lot more innovation in the world.
Thank you.
I think it's long enough. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
That was great, Pat. Thank you. Yeah, we just have to turn it off from that. It won't save that.
Are we off?
Yes. Let me just go share.